Imagine this. Suddenly, in what seems like a totally random event, the relationship is ended. Your world feels like it's just been flipped upside down. You thought everything was fine. You thought you two were happy together. But now every morning you wake up hoping this was all just a bad dream. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder what you could have done differently. Even the smallest things remind you of them. Then, you open your phone. There they are, smiling, going out with friends, posting pictures, laughing, living life as if nothing ever happened. And suddenly one question takes over your mind. How are they so happy when I'm still hurting? Doesn't this affect them too? Did I mean nothing at all? It's one of the most painful parts of a breakup. Not just losing someone, but feeling like you're the only one who lost anything at all. It can make you question everything. Did they ever really love me? Was I that easy to replace? Why do they look completely fine while I'm struggling just to get through the day? If you've ever asked yourself those questions, you're far from alone. But here's something that most people don't realize. Just because someone looks happier after a breakup doesn't necessarily mean they are. And more importantly, their apparent happiness often has far less to do with you than you think. Today, we're going to unpack why people sometimes seem happier after a breakup, what psychology tells us about it, why social media can make it even more confusing, and most importantly, why comparing your healing to theirs might be the very thing that's keeping you stuck. Because sometimes, the story you're seeing isn't the story that's actually being lived. Not even close. One of the hardest truths to accept after a breakup is that we only ever see a tiny fraction of another person's life. Especially today, most of us experience other people's lives through carefully selected moments. A photo, a story, a short video, a smile, and our brains naturally fill in the blanks. If someone posts themselves laughing at dinner, our mind quietly assumes they're happy. If they upload vacation pictures, they've already moved on. If they start going out every weekend, they're doing better than I am. But none of those conclusions are actually facts. They're stories our minds create based on very limited information. And when we're hurting, our brain has a habit of writing the worst possible version of those stories. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as negative interpretation bias. When we're emotionally distressed, we tend to interpret ambiguous information in ways that reinforce our existing fears. If you're afraid you weren't important, every smiling picture feels like proof. If you're afraid they never loved you, every fun night out feels like confirmation. But what if those assumptions aren't true? Here's something that often surprises people. Feeling relieved after a breakup doesn't automatically mean someone didn't care. Think about someone who's been carrying a heavy backpack for miles. The moment they finally set it down, they feel relief. That relief doesn't mean the backpack wasn't heavy. It simply means the struggle changed. Relationships can be similar. Sometimes both people are exhausted long before the breakup actually happens. Arguments, distance, stress, uncertainty, months of emotional tension. By the time the relationship officially ends, one person may already have spent weeks or even months processing that reality internally. So when the breakup finally happens, their emotions look very different. Not because they never loved you, but because their grieving started much earlier. To the other person, it feels sudden. To them, it may have been unfolding quietly for a long time. One of the biggest misconceptions after a breakup is believing that whoever cries longer must have loved more. Life isn't that simple. People process emotional pain differently. Some people feel everything immediately. Others suppress it until weeks or months later. Some throw themselves into work. Others spend more time with friends. Some distract themselves. Some isolate themselves. Some appear completely fine until the distractions stop. That's why comparing healing timelines rarely tells you anything meaningful about how much someone cared. It only tells you how differently two people process loss. Eventually, almost everyone who experiences heartbreak asks themselves some version of this question. If they seem so happy, did I actually matter? It's an understandable question, but it's also one of the most dangerous. because it assumes another person's current emotional state is evidence of your value. It isn't. Someone appearing happy doesn't erase the memories you shared. It doesn't erase the conversations, the laughter, the late nights, the plans you made, or the love that existed, even if it wasn't enough to keep the relationship together. Your worth isn't determined by how visibly someone mourns losing you. And perhaps that's the first truth worth holding on to. Because the more we tie our value to another person's reactions, the more control we give away over our own healing. But appearances are only part of the story. The real question is, why do some people genuinely seem to move on so much faster than others? Is it personality? Attachment style? Did they stop loving you long before the breakup happened? Or is something much deeper happening beneath the surface? Because once you understand the psychology behind those different healing timelines, you'll start to see breakups in a completely different way. So, why does it sometimes feel like the person who ended the relationship is living their best life, while you're still trying to figure out how to make it through the day? It's one of the most confusing experiences after a breakup. You look at them and think, how can they already be okay? Did I mean that little to them? But in many cases, that's not actually the right question. The better question is, when did their grieving actually begin? Because for many relationships, the breakup doesn't start the day someone says the words, "I think we should break up." Sometimes, it starts months before that conversation ever happens. One day, it suddenly falls. If you had only seen that final moment, you'd assume the fall happened instantly. But the truth is, the tree may have been weakening for years. The roots slowly deteriorated. The trunk became unstable. Storm after storm quietly weakened it, until one final gust of wind brought it down. Relationships can be surprisingly similar. Sometimes one partner begins grieving while they're still in the relationship. They start questioning whether things can be fixed. They wrestle with guilt. They imagine what life might look like if they left. They go back and forth with themselves over and over again. To the other person, everything seems normal, but internally, a decision is slowly taking shape. By the time they finally end the relationship, they may have already cried, already questioned themselves, already mourned the future they once imagined. So when you see them smiling a week later, it can feel unbelievably unfair. But what you're actually witnessing might be someone who is several months further along emotionally than you ever realized. Relief and happiness are not the same emotion. Imagine studying for one of the hardest exams of your life. For weeks you're stressed, you're anxious, you barely sleep. Then finally, you finish the test. You walk outside, and you feel relief. That doesn't mean the experience was enjoyable. It means the pressure is over. Relationships that have become emotionally exhausting can create a similar feeling. If two people have been arguing, feeling disconnected, or constantly questioning the future, ending the relationship can temporarily remove that pressure. To the outside world, that relief can look exactly like happiness. But internally, those are two very different experiences. Someone can feel relieved and still deeply grieve what they've lost. Those emotions can exist at the same time. But people cope with emotional pain in dramatically different ways. Some people process everything immediately. They cry, they journal, they talk to friends, they sit with the discomfort. Others do the exact opposite. They fill every moment with distractions. More work, more social events, more travel, more dating, more anything. As long as they don't have to sit alone with their thoughts. Neither approach automatically tells you how much someone cared. It simply tells you how they cope. Think about two people standing outside in the rain. One opens an umbrella, the other doesn't. From a distance, it might look like one person isn't getting wet. But underneath that umbrella, the storm is still happening. Distractions can work the same way. They don't always eliminate pain. Sometimes, they simply delay it. Now let's talk about the place where most people make comparisons. Social media. After a breakup, social media becomes something dangerous. Not because of the platform itself, but because of the stories we create from it. You see one smiling picture, and your brain fills in an entire life around that image. They've completely moved on. They're happier than ever. They don't even think about me anymore. But remember, social media isn't reality. It's a highlight reel. Nobody posts themselves lying awake at 2 in the morning wondering if they made the right decision. Nobody uploads a picture captioned, "Today I cried because I miss my ex." People naturally share moments that make life appear exciting, confident, or joyful. That doesn't make them dishonest. It makes them human. And when you're heartbroken, your brain compares your private struggles to someone else's public highlights. That's a comparison you'll lose almost every time. Here's something worth thinking about. Imagine two runners. One starts the race at the beginning. The other secretly began running 10 minutes earlier. Then suddenly, you tell them to line up next to each other. Who looks like they're doing better? The second runner, but only because they started earlier. Healing works in much the same way. If someone emotionally detached long before the relationship officially ended, their recovery timeline didn't begin the day yours did. You're comparing yourself to someone who may have started a completely different race. And that's why comparison becomes so misleading, because you're measuring progress without knowing where the starting line actually was. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Not everyone falls apart immediately after a breakup. Sometimes, life stays busy, friends are around, work provides distraction, new experiences fill the calendar. Everything feels manageable, until one quiet night. The distractions finally disappear, and suddenly, the emotions arrive all at once. That's why you'll sometimes hear stories of someone reaching out months later, long after everyone assumed they'd moved on. It's not because they suddenly remembered the relationship. It's because they finally had the space to feel it. Again, this doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens often enough that appearances can be incredibly deceptive. Instead of asking, "Why are they happier than me?" try asking something different. Am I judging their entire emotional world based on what I can see? Because the honest answer is usually yes. You don't know what conversations they've had, what regrets they carry, what fears they wrestle with, or what thoughts cross their mind when nobody else is around. And just as importantly, they don't know yours. But perhaps the biggest mistake people make after a breakup has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with what happens inside our own minds. Because once we become convinced that they're happier, we start measuring our healing against theirs. And that's where heartbreak often turns into something even more painful. A competition that no one can ever truly win.